Who was the first person to view cells? Hooke, right? Not Captain, the other guy. Okay. Number 2, who proposed the cell theory? Schleiden and Schwann. Okay, they have to have both to get the mark, but I don't really care about spelling as long as they got two things that at least phonetically look like they would make those sounds. Okay, I'm good with that. Okay, no half marks there. They had to get both. Okay, Schleiden and Schwann. No, that's not good enough. Okay. List the 3 points of the cell theory. So point number 1, okay, organisms are made of cells. Okay, and guys, they need to say like either all living things or all organisms. They can't say everything made of cells because not everything is made of cells. Only all living things are made of cells. So they've got to either have living things or organisms there, okay, to get that point. So that's 1 mark. Second point, cells carry out basic functions. So if they have something about basic functions, okay, that can be a mark. And thirdly, cells come from the division of existing cells. If they have something about cells reproducing by division, okay, that'll be good enough. Okay, 1 mark each for the 3 points. Questions on any of those? All right. When using a microscope, we always start with which lens? The scanning power lens. If they put lowest, like lowest, not low, okay, I will also accept that, okay, because that is what was actually in your notes, but I was looking for the name of the lowest power lens. So in the future, I'm looking for scanning power. Okay. Number 5, if you're looking at something on high power where the field of view is 400 micrometers and it takes up a quarter of the field of view, how large is it? 100. So basically you didn't know anything about microscopes, just how to figure out a quarter of 400 to get this question right. Okay, so 100 micrometers. Okay. Questions on that one? Okay. 0.1 millimeters would also be correct, yes. Any other questions on that one? Okay. Number 6, what's the main reason that we believe plants and animals have a common ancestor? I will accept the following. Okay, common structures, common processes. Those are really the only 2 reasons. Okay, if they have either one of those or both, okay, they're good. So we said that they have a common ancestor because they have a lot of structures in common, or they have a lot of processes in common. Something about, okay, things in common between the 2 of them, namely structures or processes. They can have 1 mark for that. Okay. Questions on number 6? Well, they're not the same. I won't accept the same. They're not identical. Okay, I'll take that one. Any other ones? All right, the test is out of 8, so please give them a mark out of 8, okay? And then bring them up to me, please. So the other day, we went over that we thought plants and animals had a common ancestor because they have so many structures and processes in common. What we're going to look at today are a lot of those common structures and processes, but also we're going to look at some of the pretty major differences between plant and animal cells, which will then lead us to talking about what do the parts do, okay? And we'll label, you guys will each get color diagrams of the plant and animal cell, which we will label today. That way, you can label your diagrams from yesterday's lab. Okay, so the expectation is that when you hand in your microscopy lab next week, okay, you have done your best to correctly label the cells in that lab diagram. All right, so what we're going to go over today, okay, know and understand how plant and animal cells are different, understand why those differences are present and necessary, and then be able to correctly label plant and animal cells. Okay. So plants and animals have a lot of similarities, but they have some differences. Why are the differences there? What's the major difference between plants and animals? Right, plants have to carry out photosynthesis. Animals don't. Okay? Animals eat other organisms, be it plant or animal or both, in order to get their energy. That is how they get their sugar. Right? Plants do not eat other things. Well, with the exception of the carnivorous plants like the sundew and the Venus flytrap and the pitcher plant. Okay? Those are carnivorous plants. Do they get a lot of energy out of the bugs they eat? No. Okay, they are primarily photosynthetic. In fact, they get very little energy from the bugs they eat. They mostly get nutrients and minerals and things like that from the bugs that they eat because they tend to grow in nutrient-poor soil. All right. So with those exceptions, all plants are still photosynthetic. Even those plants are photosynthetic. Okay, they have to carry that out. We don't. Okay, if we did, when you're hungry, all you'd have to do is go under some light, and you wouldn't feel hungry anymore. Okay, because you could just carry out photosynthesis and make sugar. Okay, obviously it doesn't work that way. You still get hungry laying on the beach, okay, under the sun, because we don't carry out photosynthesis. Because of those differences, those major differences in what we call the mode of nutrition, there have to be cellular differences, because the cells have to carry out the basic functions of the organism. Okay, that we're going to come back to that point of the cell theory all the time. Okay. If they're going to carry out the basic functions, if you're a plant, one of your basic functions is carrying out photosynthesis. So you've got to have some sort of structure within the cell that can do that. Okay? If you're an animal, you've got to be able to digest food. There's got to be a part of the cell that can do that job as a basic function of the organism. Everybody follow? Okay, so we're going to look at kind of those similarities and differences. All right, modes of nutrition, key term. Okay? Your mode of nutrition is how you get your energy. Okay, so there's subtle differences between plant and animal cells. Subtle means that they're kind of obvious. Okay, the different modes of nutrition is where the biggest differences occur. If you're an animal, you eat other things. If you're a plant, okay, you take light from the sun and you use it to make glucose. Okay, glucose is this stuff, C6H12O6. Okay, so it's a hydrocarbon. That's what sugar is. Okay. In order to make this, plants take carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight. Since sunlight's not a chemical, it's a source of energy, it doesn't get written into a chemical equation. Everybody all right with that? Okay. The byproducts of this are glucose, C6H12O6, and what gas do plants produce? Oxygen. That's why plants are so important. Okay, what does that reaction look like? Yeah, except it's backwards. Okay? It's like a combustion reaction, except the reactants are the products of a combustion reaction, and the products are the reactants of a combustion reaction. Okay? Here's why that's so important. What do we need? And we need oxygen and food. So this process goes on in both plants and animals once they acquire sugar. That process is going on in all of your cells right now. You are burning glucose, reacting it with oxygen, and producing carbon dioxide, which you're exhaling, and water. Okay? This is cellular respiration. It is the process that yields energy for all living organisms, plants included. Okay? Plants don't just make glucose for the fun of it. Okay? They make glucose because it's their fuel. They're going to carry out this reaction the same as we do. Okay? They're going to burn the sugar that they make to release its energy in the same way that our cells do. All right. Once these, oh man, that thing is awful. Really got to fix that. Okay. So we got the carbon dioxide here, and we got water vapor. What can use that? Plants. This is the fuel. This is the fuel that plants use to carry out photosynthesis. So then they go along and carry out photosynthesis, where they take carbon dioxide and water, and using energy from sunlight, okay, make glucose and oxygen. So this is the reaction for photosynthesis. How many people remember learning about like the water cycle and the nitrogen cycle and the carbon cycle when you're in junior high? Okay? This is the carbon cycle. Plants make the raw materials for us, we make the raw materials for them. Okay? And it cycles back and forth, and everybody's happy. Okay, everybody kind of follow where we're going with that? Right? I'm never going to ask you to write out this reaction and balance it or anything like that. I haven't balanced it. Okay? Well, I'm not going to ask you to do that. I'm just saying it's these two reactions that are the reason for the differences between plant and animal cells. The machinery you need to carry out photosynthesis is way different than the machinery you need to carry out this process. Right? Now, I said both plants and animals carry out this process, the cellular respiration. Okay? That takes place in the mitochondria. Animals have to, however, break down the food they eat to make this, because we don't just eat glucose. Okay? We eat plants, animals, fats, okay, things like that, and our body has to break those down and make this out of it. So we have to have organelles in our body that can break more complex things down to make this. Okay? All right. Okay, the first mode of nutrition that we're going over, Chemoheterotrophs. Okay. We are chemoheterotrophs. We use chemical energy from other organisms for food. Okay? Chemo means chemical, hetero means other or many, and troph means feeder. We are taking the chemical energy from other organisms or many organisms to feed ourselves. Okay? Chemical other feeder is essentially what chemoheterotroph breaks down to. Okay, so animals are chemoheterotrophs, so we have to consume chemicals from other organisms to make energy. So our cells have to contain lysosomes. Okay? Lysosomes are the stomach of the cell. They have digestive enzymes inside of them, very similar to the ones that are in your stomach. Okay? And they chemically break down food, okay, to release things like sugars, amino acids, okay, and things like that. Okay, so worms would have those. Okay, sharks obviously would have those. We have those. Fungus, fungi, plural. Okay, fungi also have these. A fungus actually digests food. Okay, it eats in the same way, well, not quite the same way, but in a similar way to us. All right, if you have like athlete's foot, okay, athlete's foot is itchy because it is a fungus living on your body and actually eating you. That's why it's itchy. Okay? The fungus is actually eating the cells in your feet, and that's itchy. How many of you are wishing you could scratch your feet right now? Okay? You're thinking about it and it's grossing you out. Okay? But that's what happens. Okay? With a fungus, the part that we see, like the mushroom, okay, is actually the reproductive organ of the fungus. Okay? The part that actually feeds if you look at it under a microscope, looks like the roots of a plant. Okay? But they are actually called hyphae, and they're like stomachs, a whole bunch of little stomachs. Okay? And what they do is they secrete digestive enzymes, very similar to what we have in our stomach, and they digest the tissue around them. So they put these roots through your skin, feet, whatever, okay? And then they secrete these digestive enzymes which break down your cells, and then they absorb the materials that they digest. Okay, so they physically consume your skin and cells. Kylie's about to have a meltdown over there because she's getting so grossed out. Okay, but yeah, that's how a fungus works. Okay, a fungus that's breaking down something dead in the forest is doing exactly the same thing. It's just breaking down the dead material of the tree or whatever. Okay, if you've ever seen like mold growing on a piece of bread or something like that, it's doing the same thing. It's just spreading its hyphae throughout the material, okay, the bread or whatever, and digesting it. Okay, eventually, if a mold really gets going, you see the material starting to change, get soft. Have you ever seen an orange as it starts to spoil, or a strawberry as it starts to spoil? It gets soft and watery. That's because the mold is actually chemically changing that material and making it squishier, releasing water, things like that. Okay, so as they spoil, that's what's going on. Does that sort of make sense? Okay, all of these organisms have to have lysosomes inside of their cells in order to digest food. All right. So, animal cells. Okay, animal cells have a few key differences other than just lysosomes inside. Lysosomes are the key because they have to do with how we get energy, right? But there are other things. As an animal, we can typically do what? That a plant can't do. Move. Okay? So because we can move, our cells need to be able to change shape and be flexible and stretch and compress and do all these kinds of things. Okay? If our cells had cell walls, we wouldn't be nearly as flexible or mobile as we are. Okay? Having a cell wall is like making a person out of bricks. Okay? Imagine trying to walk if you were made of something solid and inflexible, right? Like you would just kind of pick up your feet and rock back and forth. You wouldn't be fast enough to catch any food and you'd probably starve, right? So our cells have to be flexible in order to facilitate movement. Okay? If the cells are going to stretch and they're going to be flexible, there needs to be something in addition to the membrane to keep them from overstretching and popping or rupturing. Okay? So inside of them are little things, okay, called a cytoskeleton. Okay? It's not bones. Don't get the idea there's bones inside of a cell. There aren't. Okay? These are kind of elastic-like fibers that anchor themselves to different sides of the cell. So when the cell stretches and twists, they keep it from going far enough to rupture the membrane. Everybody follow there? Okay? So that's what they do. They're like bungee cords and things like that that keep the cell from, they'll allow it to change shape but don't allow it to break. Okay. Obviously, this structure is in there. We talked about it. The lysosome is the thing that digests food. A peroxisome is like a lysosome, except it doesn't have any food in it yet. Okay. So what happens is there's an organ called the Golgi right here that makes the digestive enzymes and essentially makes peroxisomes. So the peroxisomes go out into the cell and they wait for food particles to merge with them, and then they become a lysosome because they're breaking stuff down. Okay, so animal cells have to be somewhat plastic. That's able to change shape, okay, due to the needs for mobility. Okay, so that's important. Okay, so they contain fibrous materials that allow the cell to change shape. Right, so we don't have a cell wall on an animal cell because that would defeat the purpose of being flexible. Okay. Now, does that mean that plants are completely inflexible because they have a cell wall? Actually, not at all. In fact, cell walls are actually quite pliable, but they don't allow for movement, and obviously plants don't move. Okay? But some plants, they secrete things that make their cell walls even harder. Okay? It's something called lignin, which we'll talk about later on in the unit, that acts like if each plant cell was a brick, lignin is like the mortar that holds the bricks together. Okay? It cements them together so that they become stiffer, harder, and stronger. Okay? Now, that's essentially what makes like lumber and wood, okay, is this lignin cementing the cells together. Okay? Is wood still somewhat flexible? I mean, to an extent, right? I mean, we build houses out of it. It's strong, but it's also somewhat flexible. If you've ever seen a palm tree in a hurricane, okay, like if you walk up to a palm tree and you push on it, it feels quite firm, stiff. Okay, but in a hurricane, that thing can bend almost all the way to the ground. Okay, because it's got enough flexibility to withstand those kinds of environmental conditions. So don't get the idea that plant cells are incredibly rigid. They're fairly rigid. All right, the other mode of nutrition, photoautotrophs. So photo means light, auto means self, and troph means feeder. Okay, so if you are a photoautotroph, you can feed yourself using light. In other words, you're photosynthetic. Okay, so plant cells can produce their own food by capturing sunlight and using its power to separate carbon dioxide and water, okay, to make glucose. Okay, so that's anything that's photosynthetic. Not just multicellular plants, but even like single-celled algae and things like that are also photoautotrophs. Okay, everybody good with that slide? All right, so plants have to have specialized organelles called chloroplasts. Chloroplasts contain chlorophyll, and chlorophyll is the chemical that allows photosynthesis to take place. Okay, so inside of the plant cell, these green things here are all chloroplasts. Okay, that is where the chlorophyll is concentrated. A chloroplast essentially looks like this. Inside are what looks like stacks of coins. Okay, those are called thylakoids, and that's where photosynthesis takes place. That's where all the chlorophyll is concentrated. Okay, inside of there. Okay. Plants also have to support long stems and leaves, so they have a fair amount of weight that they have to support. Okay. So to do this, they have stiff cell walls and they have large vacuoles filled with water. That's what this big thing here is. Okay. Water vacuoles and stiff cell walls are what support a plant. Okay. Cell walls on their own aren't enough to support a plant. Okay, the water vacuoles can help that out. Okay, if you've ever seen what a plant looks like if it hasn't been watered for a while, okay, and unfortunately I watered all my plants a little while ago, so none of them look sick. Got some. Okay, this one's kind of looking sick over here. Okay, if you look at this plant here, you can see that the leaves are starting to droop. Okay, versus these ones where the leaves are quite upright. Okay, the leaves on this one, they're much more bent. Okay, bent and downward facing, where these ones are flat, okay, almost horizontal. Okay. The reason for the difference there is that that plant is, well, you can tell the dirt is quite dry. Okay, and so what's happening is as the plant gets dehydrated, it starts to, or water starts to move out of these vacuoles and into the cell by a process we'll talk about in a few days. Okay, it's called osmosis, but water starts to move out of these vacuoles. Well, what these vacuoles are doing when they're full is kind of like a water balloon. Okay, if you fill a water balloon really full with water, it's actually fairly stiff. Like when you push on it, it changes shape a little bit, but not like, okay, not like a balloon with no water in it, right, which is just flimsy. Okay, so the water pressure here pushes against the cell wall, and they act together to support the plant. As water gets removed from these, that push disappears. And now the cell walls by themselves aren't strong enough to hold all the weight that's above, and the plant wilts. Okay, that is, it kind of gets soft and wilty looking and kind of bends. Okay, if you water it, it'll perk right back up again. Those water vacuoles will fill up, and they'll regain all of that shape that they had before, and the plant will look healthy again. Right? Everybody kind of follow me there? Okay, so a plant has these structures for support because it doesn't have bones and it's not mobile. Okay, it doesn't need to be mobile, so it actually looks to be stiff. All right, looking at plants and animal cells. Okay, there's lots of similarities, and most of those come in the areas of intracellular transport and waste excretion. Okay, because those processes are similar whether you're a plant or an animal. You got to get rid of stuff. Okay, you got to get rid of your waste products. You got to transport materials from one place to another, and those materials tend to be the same kind of materials. You got to move proteins from place to place. You got to move sugars from place to place. things like that within the cell, right? So obviously, big similarity is the presence of the nucleus in both cells, okay? And the nucleolus, which is the little dot inside of it, okay? They both have that because both plants and animals have DNA, okay? And DNA gets stored in the nucleus, okay? DNA is what tells your cells how to do things. So they have a central location for that to be stored, right? Surrounding the nucleus is this stuff called rough ER, okay? So it's these folded kind of structures that are covered in these little bumps, okay? The little bumps are called ribosomes, and they both have those as well. Ribosomes make protein, so the rough ER transports protein. The reason it's surrounding the nucleus is because the nucleus is where the instructions are for making protein. This way things don't have to travel very far, okay? The instructions go right outside, the things that are ready to make protein are right there, and then the things ready to transport the protein are also right there, okay? And so that process can happen more quickly, right? They both have smooth ER, okay? You can see that kind of up here, okay? Smooth ER is a lot like rough ER, except it's not covered in ribosomes, okay? So instead of transporting proteins, it transports things like fats, makes fats actually, detoxifies poisons, okay, things like that. So actually a lot of the cell is filled with this. The diagram doesn't really show that, but smooth ER kind of goes everywhere, because it's kind of like the liver almost of the cell. Okay, they both have these, okay, mitochondria. Mitochondria is where cellular respiration, the burning of sugar, occurs, and since they both use sugar as a source of chemical energy, okay, they both have to have those. They're both going to have a Golgi apparatus. Okay, that's the Golgi right there. The Golgi apparatus is responsible for the production of certain enzymes, which is obviously more important for the animal, but also plants require them. But mostly it's responsible for the excretion of waste. Okay, waste products go to the Golgi puts them in little special vesicles or bubbles, and the bubbles leave the cell through the membrane. Okay, does the same job in both. Right. They obviously both have a membrane as well. Okay. You don't always see the plant cell's membrane because you see the wall instead, but the membrane lines just inside of the cell wall. Okay. So plant cells also have a cell membrane, and the cell membrane is what keeps things in or keeps things out. It controls entry and exit to the cell. Not consciously, okay, but it does control or keep certain things out and keep good things in. Okay. That's its primary job. Okay, we call those processes endocytosis, that's moving into the cell, and exocytosis, moving out of the cell. Okay. So both have a membrane. Membrane's really important. Membranes are essentially identical. Okay, they're made out of the same materials, fats, okay, things like that. And the volume of the cell that isn't filled with organelles, okay, is filled with something called cytoplasm. They both have that. Okay? Cytoplasm is important. You don't want cells that are filled with air. Because if the cells are filled with air, what would happen to all the structures in the cell? They'd fall. And they'd all be on the bottom of the cell. Okay? The cell's filled with this cytoplasm, which is like water, okay? And it keeps them kind of, all the organelles kind of floating around inside, as opposed to all settling to the bottom. Okay? The other thing cytoplasm does is all the ways the cell moves materials depend on having fluid. Okay? They wouldn't move through air. If the cells were filled with air, they wouldn't be able to transport anything. Okay? So that cytoplasm helps to do that. Okay? Are we finding a lot of things in common here? Quite a few, right? And that's, again, just looking really at structure, not so much at processes. Now, differences. Obviously, cell wall for the plant, no cell wall for the animal. Okay? Presence of chloroplasts in the plant. No chloroplasts in the animal, but lysosomes in the animal, no lysosomes in the plant. Okay, and peroxisomes in the animal, no peroxisomes in the plant. Okay, another difference, these two little structures here. You're only going to find those in animal cells, and they're called centrioles. They help when the cell is getting ready to divide. Okay, when the cell is getting ready to divide, what's the most important thing in the cell? Wouldn't be able to live without it if it didn't have it. What's inside the nucleus? Well, there's a membrane that goes around the outside of it, yes. What gets stored in the nucleus? DNA. Okay? Your genetic code. The DNA is the instructions for doing and making everything the cell needs. Without it, cell dies. Okay? Any mistakes in it, cell dies. Right? It's crucial that it has that stuff. So the first thing a cell does before it divides is it makes a copy of all of its DNA, because there's going to be 2 of it soon. And each one is going to need a full copy of all the DNA. Now, if you're an animal cell, while you're dividing, it's possible the cell could radically change shape or twist or do something like that. And if you're right in the process of splitting the DNA and making sure that both cells are going to get the same amount and all of it, that could lead to a shortage of DNA in one cell and an excess in the other. That means both cells would die. So what the centrioles do is one goes to each pole of the cell before it divides. And right before it divides, all the DNA lines up along the middle. Right? The centrioles put out cables. Well, they're not cables, but they look like cables. Okay? Little fibers that latch onto all of the DNA. And then it pulls that DNA back to each side of the cell, making sure that none of it gets lost. That way, if the cell changes shape while it's dividing, none of the little chromosomes end up in the wrong side. Okay? Plants don't need that, because a plant cell has a rigid cell wall that will prevent it from changing shape during cell division, so they don't need them. Okay? So you only see centrioles in animal cells, and that's what they're doing. Okay? So that's these 2 things here that kind of look like gears, or maybe like weird looking pasta or something. Okay. All right. Questions on that? That make sense to everybody? All right. I want you guys to work on these questions here for a few minutes while I pass out the cell diagrams, and then we'll go through these, and then we'll label our cell diagrams. So, what's the main reason for the differences between plant and animal cells? Could probably answer this with 3 words. Modes of nutrition. Yeah. Okay. If you said one's photosynthetic and the other eats things, I mean that's modes of nutrition. But modes of nutrition is kind of the technical term that we use. Okay. That's where most of the cellular machinery differs. Okay. You need chloroplasts for carrying out photosynthesis. If you're a plant, you need cell walls and water vacuoles. Animals don't have those. Okay. So, what organelle supplies plants with energy, and what process does it use? Actually, I just said it a minute ago. The chloroplasts, yeah. The chloroplasts supply chemical energy to the plant cell. Okay, chemical energy in the form of glucose because they carry out photosynthesis, which makes glucose. Okay. All right, what organelle supplies animal cells with energy? The lysosomes, right. They're the ones that digest food and turn it into the chemical energy they require, glucose. Okay, number 4, transport within plant and animal cells is done in the same fashion, which we'll look at next week. Okay, why would this have been kept the same from an evolutionary standpoint when so many other things have been altered? Why would they still be using the same processes? It gets the job done. It's as simple as that. Yeah, okay? Natural selection selects for processes and structures that work. If they work and nothing better comes along, they're kept. Okay? So with natural selection, it works kind of like this. Let's imagine we have a pack of wolves. Okay? We have a pack of wolves, and some new wolf pups are born. One of the wolf pups is able to see clearly at night, as well as during the day. Will that be an advantage for that wolf pup over the others? Yes. Now, it's never a mutation like that. It's usually something small. But okay, let's just say it was something like that. Well, that wolf pup is now going to be able to hunt both day and night effectively, which means it will be more well-fed than the other wolves, which means it will be stronger, it will grow bigger. Okay? Does that also mean that it is more likely to pass on its genes to its offspring than maybe other ones? Yes. Okay? That's how natural selection leads to a change in a species. That's evolution. Change in a species is evolution. So it's natural selection over the course of a long time. Okay? If I come back to that wolf pack, let's say 50 years from now, is it a good chance? I mean, obviously most of the wolves that were there when I looked 50 years ago are gone. They're dead. Okay? But am I more likely to find a whole bunch of wolves that can see well at night in that pack now? Yes, okay, because nature will select for the traits that are most successful, and those animals that are most successful reproduce more often and pass on their genes more often than others. Okay, if you have some sort of mutation that makes you weaker, you may not survive long enough to reproduce, and that mutation will be eliminated. Right, and it just won't appear in the genes of your offspring because you won't have any, okay, or in the population later on. Okay, the population changes over time as a result of natural selection. That's evolution. Does that sort of make sense? Okay, that's how that process works. Okay, number 5, the nutritional needs of plants and animals are very different. Which would have survived best in a primordial Earth that had very little oxygen or organic material available? Photoautotrophs or chemoheterotrophs? Which one's going to survive better? Photoautotrophs. Okay, they can make their own oxygen. There's nothing but carbon dioxide, which is their raw material. Sunlight and water are available. Okay, but if you're a chemoheterotroph and there's very few plants, very little organic material, and very little oxygen, you're pretty much screwed because those are your raw materials. Okay, without oxygen, you can't carry out cellular respiration. Without food, you starve. Okay, you're pretty much done. A plant, however, can make its own food using carbon dioxide, which is plentiful, and it produces oxygen as a byproduct, which it can then use to burn the sugar. Okay? That's why some of the first organisms that appeared on Earth would have most likely been photoautotrophs of some kind. Okay, questions on those? All right. Take out your diagrams that I just gave you, and we'll start with the animal cell. How important are these diagrams going to be for you? Very, because you'll have a couple of quizzes, probably 3, that involve labeling the cell, as well as that will be on your unit exam for sure. Okay? It's not just about what the structures are, though. We're also going to be looking at what do they do. Okay? I'll talk about what they do today, but we'll do our formal kind of me teaching you what all the parts do starting tomorrow and Monday. Okay? All right, so we'll start right here with this empty looking little bubble. Okay, this empty looking little bubble is a peroxisome. Okay, it's a peroxisome because it contains digestive enzymes but hasn't got any food in it yet. Okay, right next to that we see this diverging set of lines here that are touching this kind of faint-looking fibrous structure. Okay, these are part of the cytoskeleton. Okay, in particular, they are microfilaments. So those are those fibers we said allow the cell to change shape, but not too far. Okay, not so far that it ruptures. All right, this orange kind of sausage-looking thing here is a mitochondria. Okay, and the mitochondria burn sugar and release its chemical energy. Okay, so they're a very important organelle. That's why there's more than one of them, okay, in every cell. Okay, in fact, there are many in every cell, releasing, like we said, all the stored energy in glucose for you. Okay, so these kind of control your metabolism. If you have a fever, these are working overtime. Okay, they're burning more sugar than normal, and they're driving your body temperature up. Okay, your body also stops doing all the things that cool it and allows your body temperature to go up. Okay, this thing here, I don't know why they show this, but it's on every animal cell diagram out there. And almost no animal cells actually have one. Okay, in fact, if you're a woman, you don't have any cells in your body that have one. If you're a guy, you have several million actually. Your sperm cells are the ones that have the flagellum on them, okay? But like your cells in your skin and the cells in your spine and the cells in your muscles don't have a flagellum because they don't move around, okay? So it's on there, but like I said, very few animal cells actually have a tail, okay, that they use to move around. Okay, the euglena that you looked at yesterday does have one, but you probably didn't see it because it's really small. Okay, what's this big purple structure here in the middle? It's the nucleus. Okay, so that's going to be this middle one here. What do we call the thing that goes around the nucleus? It's like the thing that goes around the cell. Okay, it's like the cell membrane, except it's for the nucleus, so it's the nuclear membrane, yeah. Okay. Okay. That's an N, not an M, not membrane. Oh, put the pencil. Okay. Membrane. Okay. The nuclear membrane is similar to the cell membrane, but it also has some pretty major differences. Basically, nothing gets through the nuclear membrane. Okay? Lots of stuff can pass through the cell membrane. Okay? Lots of things need to get in and out of the cell, and it's what we call selectively permeable, and that's what controls what gets in and out. The nuclear membrane is like Trump's wall that he wants to build. Okay? Nothing will get through this wall, and yeah, it's there because we don't want anything to get into the nucleus, because what's in here? DNA. And DNA is fragile and important. We don't want anything to get in there and damage it. Okay? So the nuclear membrane actually has holes all over it called nuclear pores. That's where DNA is allowed out or DNA is allowed in. But those are the only two things that are allowed in or out, okay, of the cells, DNA and RNA. It's basically just genetic material. All right, the big purple thing in the middle of the nucleus is called the nucleolus. Okay, now, the nucleus is like a library. It isn't a library, but it's like a library. It stores information, and that information can be looked up and used for other things. Okay? It holds your DNA. Your DNA codes for information and for processes, so we can look at it and find those instructions. The nucleolus is kind of like the librarian. It knows where all of the important instructions are. So if you're part of the cell and you're saying, you know what, we're really getting short on insulin, we need to make some more, okay, it's the nucleolus that looks up the instructions for you. Okay, and what it does is it finds the part of your DNA that codes for insulin and it makes a copy of it. And then it sends that copy out through the nucleus, through the nuclear membrane, sorry, to the ribosomes that are on the rough ER, and they'll make insulin. All right? It never sends out the original DNA because it might not get it back. All right? So it only ever makes a copy of it, okay, and sends the copy out instead. So the nucleolus essentially controls the making of proteins or protein synthesis, okay, and copies DNA. Okay? The nucleus just stores it. Right? So all along in your life where you were told the nucleus is the brain of the cell, it's not. If you write that, you will get 0. Do not write that the nucleus is the brain of the cell because it's not. Okay? A brain makes conscious decisions and is made of many cells. This is not a brain. Okay, that's like it's like my triangle rant, except this is my biology. Nucleus is not a brain rant. Okay? It just holds your DNA. It doesn't actually control anything. Okay? It's just where all the information is stored. Right? It's not sending out messages saying, hey, you're not doing your job. It doesn't do that. Okay? It just holds the genetic information. Okay? All right. This little one here underneath nucleolus is pointing at the little dots. Some of them are on the rough ER and some of them are floating free in the cytoplasm. Okay? Those are the ribosomes. The ribosomes are the construction workers of your cell. They build proteins. Okay, and then this stuff here that has the ribosomes on it is the rough endoplasmic reticulum, which you can thankfully abbreviate ER. Okay, endoplasmic reticulum. And you can see that it's everywhere in the cell. There's some, a lot of it around the nucleus, but there's some over here. Okay, then there's the smooth ER, which is the other kind, and it tends to be in a lot of places in the cell as well. Okay, the endoplasmic reticulum, the rough in particular, transports proteins. It's covered with ribosomes that are making proteins. Its job is to transport them quickly from one place to another. All right. Down below here, outside of the cell is the cell membrane. Remember, animal cells don't have a cell wall. This is the cell membrane. Okay? And your cell membrane, in all diagrams, looks like this smooth sheet of like saran wrap. Okay? It's not. Okay? Your cell wall is a very complex matrix of different things. Okay? It would be like if you made Jell-O, but you had a whole bunch of stuff in the Jell-O. Okay, like grapes and fruit and stuff like that. Okay, it's this matrix of one material that's got other materials embedded in it that do different jobs. Okay, so it's way more complex than it looks here. Right? It contains receptors, like little antennas that receive chemical signals, okay, and things like that. It's a very complex thing that controls two processes: endocytosis and exocytosis. Okay, and those are words you'll need to know, but we'll talk about them later. Okay, all right. Next thing, this stuff here, okay? If this is the rough ER, this is the smooth ER. Okay, and it's endoplasmic reticulum, but we won't write the whole thing. We'll just say ER. Okay, smooth endoplasmic reticulum has many jobs. Okay, it detoxifies poisons. It helps to break down complex carbohydrates like starches into more simple sugars. It transports hormones, and it produces fats. Okay? Fats are crucial because that's what all membranes are made out of. And every one of those organelles has a membrane. Okay? The cell has its own big membrane, the nucleus has its own big membrane, and every organelle has its own membrane. So lots of fats are needed in the cell to repair membranes because they break all the time. Okay? They get damaged, stuff runs into them, things attack cells and damage the membranes. Got to be repaired, so they're constantly working to make the stuff membranes are made out of for repair. Okay. All right, this big orange thing here is the Golgi apparatus. Okay, and the Golgi apparatus packages wastes materials to get them out of the cell. So it's the garbage man of the cell. Okay, this thing here looks like the peroxisomes, except it's got food in it, so it's a... Ooh, it's the one thing the animal cells have that the plant cells don't. It starts with L. Lysosome. Okay, and then we see a little bit more of the cytoskeleton here, but this stuff looks a little different than the stuff we labeled up here at the top of the cell. That's because your cytoskeleton is made of fibers with different densities and different structures. So while this is still part of the cytoskeleton, these are microtubules. Okay, those were small, thin fibers or filaments. These you can, I don't know if you look closely, they almost look like they're hollow like a tube, so they are microtubules. Okay, they're a little bit stronger. Okay, and then these two things here, we talked about them before. Okay, they help the animal cell control where all the DNA goes during cell division. They are the centrioles. and they are present only in animal cells. Okay, so might want to put a star beside centrioles, lysosomes, and peroxisomes, as those are things only chemoheterotrophs would have in their cells. Okay, I mean, you could put a star beside flagellum too, but it's there so rarely that we probably don't need to bother. Okay, questions on any of those? All right. The plant cell will go faster because so many of the things are the same. Okay. All right. One of the things that's different. Okay, we got the big water vacuole here in the middle, so that's going to be this one, water vacuole, right? And that's the job of that is to push against the cell wall and help maintain the stiffness and shape of the cell. Okay. The water vacuole also has a special membrane to help deal with this pressure. Okay. That membrane is called a tonoplast. All right. What was the orange thing in the animal cell called? Mitochondria. Still called the mitochondria here. Still does the same thing. Burns sugar for energy. Okay. What were the little dots called? No, the little dots, not the little fiber. Starts with R. Ribosomes. Okay. They do the same thing in plant cells. They make proteins. Okay. Right in here, we got the little fibers. They're part of the cytoskeleton. Plant cytoskeleton is made out of different stuff. Okay, so we'll say cytoskeleton. Okay, but these are cellulose fibers now. Okay, cellulose fibers is the stuff that's in fiber. Okay, you've probably heard, that fiber is good for you. Dietary fiber is good for you. Okay, if you eat like celery and whole grains and things like that, you get lots of fiber out of that because that's what plants cell walls and plant cytoskeletons are made out of, is cellulose fiber. The reason it's important for you, you can't digest it. Okay, so you eat it, but your body can't break it down, so it goes through your entire digestive tract essentially unaltered, which means it acts like a brush and it cleans you out. And it's really good for you because you don't want your intestines to get clogged with the stuff that goes through them all the time because it's gross. Yeah? Okay, so cellulose fiber is good for you. Okay, the big green thing is the chloroplast. Okay, carries out photosynthesis for the plant cell, and you can put a star beside that because you're only going to find those in plant cells. Okay, and I guess we can put a star beside these two things as well because they are only in plant cells. Okay, I never ask anyone to label these, which is why I partially erased them, but people always ask what they are. They're called plasmodesmata. Essentially, plant cells can share their cytoplasm with each other, and these are the little holes that allow the cytoplasm to move through. Okay, okay, what was the orange thing here in the animal cell? Golgi apparatus, still does the same thing, it's still a garbage man. That's an R, I don't know why the top of that R is so big. Okay, inside of the cell wall is the cell membrane. Okay, so we got cell membrane down here. Okay, does the same thing and is made out of essentially the same stuff as it is in an animal cell, fats. Okay, and then obviously the big orange thing going around the outside is the cell wall. Okay, this one, scratch it off. Shouldn't be there. Plants don't have those. Okay, this stuff here, same as in the animal cell. That is the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. Does the same thing it does in an animal cell. This stuff is still the rough endoplasmic reticulum. Does the same thing it does in an animal cell, transports protein. Okay, all the parts of the nucleus still the same. So we got nucleolus, okay, which controls protein synthesis and copies DNA. Okay, we got the nucleus, and we got the nuclear membrane. Okay, one thing to be aware of. I'm not too picky about spelling on the labeling, except for two structures. Those two structures are the nucleus and the nucleolus. Those are the only two you got to spell right, like 100% right. Because I have too many people who don't remember which one's which, and then they hedge their bets and write nucleolus, thinking I'll just think it's a spelling mistake. But what I think is that you don't know what it is, and you're just wrong. Okay? So make sure when you're labeling nucleus and nucleolus that you spell those right, because they are two very different things. Okay? All right. Questions on those? Which one? This? That's a mitochondria, same as this one. If you want to do that. Okay, this is one here that's like, this one's been cut in half so you could see inside, and no, it's one you just can't see inside of it. All right, next week your quizzes will be on the parts of the cell. Okay, you'll have to label a cell or tell me what that part of the cell does. Okay, so that's something that we're headed towards.